6 months ago, my life fell apart like a fragile porcelain cup that slipped out of my hands and hit the tile with a thud when I found out that my husband, Luke, was cheating on me with some young, confident girl from his office. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. And although it seemed to me at the time that it was sudden, unexpected, and almost like a bolt from the blue, now, looking back, I realized that I probably should have foreseen this, because the clues, like clues in a bad detective story, were scattered everywhere, late nights at work, which became more frequent. And, most offensively, they were taken for granted by him, mysterious text messages that he was in no hurry to show me, hiding the phone screen with the look of a student caught with a clue, a sudden, almost caricatured interest in weekend work, when he, who used to complain about any need to leave the house on Saturday, suddenly began to overwork, catch up on reports, or prepare for presentations. But when you're busy raising a 6-year-old child, when your whole day is scheduled by the minute, starting from the morning struggle to put on socks and ending with evening attempts to get your son to brush his teeth without hysterics, sometimes you don't notice the obvious signs that look you straight in the face, waving a red flag in front of your nose and shouting into a megaphone while you cook pasta and checking your homework at the same time. My name is Rosaria, and at the age of 30, I never thought that I would start all over again as a single mother, the one who fills out tax returns, drives her child to school, cooks dinner, decides how to fix a leaking faucet, and tries not to cry into her pillow at night. Now I live in a modest 2-room apartment in Turin, just a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. Moving closer to them seemed like a logical choice at a time when the ground was slipping away from under my feet and I clung to any anchors of stability, even though our relationship had always been complicated, tense, full of mutual resentment, unexpressed expectations, and the feeling that I'm always doing something wrong. Fortunately, I managed to find a good job in a marketing company pretty quickly, not a lifelong dream, of course, but the pay is decent, the colleagues are polite, and I really like the job. She keeps your mind in good shape, makes you think, makes you feel needed, professional, and not just a mother. The only catch is that from time to time I have to go on business trips. Nothing serious, just for a day or two, but that's when things get especially interesting in my relationship with my parents. The first time I asked them to look after Bernardo during a business trip, you'd think I was offering them an endurance test. My father rolled his eyes with such drama, as if he'd been forced to watch all the episodes of a boring TV series, and muttered something under his breath, while my mother crossed her arms over her chest. And she said, "We're retired, Rosaria. We weren't going to be full-time babysitters at our age." I nodded, looking at the floor, feeling my cheeks heat up, and, almost suffocating from my own humiliation, I whispered, "I'll pay you." It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly they relented, began to consider it as an opportunity, although, of course, they did not forget for a minute to remind me what a huge imposition it was, how hard it was for them, poor pensioners, to keep an eye on their grandson, who, in fact, quietly plays with constructors and rarely brings trouble. Rush. My older sister, Sarah, can bring her children anytime she wants, without warning, without gratitude, and the parents, like schoolchildren at a matinee, throw a real party, prepare treats, put on music and crumble in emotion. Last week, Sarah showed up, as usual, suddenly, with her 2 children, one from each of her ex-boyfriends, and my mom literally beamed. "Oh, my precious angels," she said, while Dad enthusiastically ran for a cookie jar. And when I bring Bernardo, they greet him like a tax return, unavoidable but unwelcome. "Bernardo, honey, go play in the guest room," Mom said during our last visit, and then turned to me with that look I hate now, mocking, appreciative, as if she was flipping through a menu and deciding whether to try a dish. "Mrs. Henderson's son just got divorced. He's a dentist, you know, very successful," she added, as if that was going to change everything. "Mom, I'm not interested in being framed right now," I replied, for the 100th time, like a tired and learned mantra. "I need time to focus on Bernardo and my career." "That's your problem, Rosaria," my father interjected, sitting in his eternal armchair with a newspaper. "You're too picky." No wonder Luke left. The irony did not escape me. Sarah, with 2 illegitimate children, who has never had a steady job and is now living on her next boyfriend's money, somehow still remains a favorite, while I, a woman who was betrayed, carry everything myself and ask for almost nothing, remain a disappointment. Have you thought about what I said about Dr. Raimondo's son? My mother asked yesterday when she returned Bernardo to me after a short business trip. He's only been divorced twice, and it's not even his fault in the second case, she added, as if that makes him the perfect candidate. I've learned to let their comments roll down my back like water on glass, mostly because what choice do I have? They're Bernardo's grandparents, and despite their obvious preference for Sarah and her children, I need their help. But sometimes, late at night, when the apartment is quiet, Bernardo is asleep, hugging his teddy bear, and I'm standing in the kitchen with a cup of tea and looking out the dark window. I wonder, how can my own parents treat me like this? How can they criticize my every move, turning a blind eye to the chaos that Sarah creates, as if my grief, my devotion, my struggle are nothing compared to her frivolity? I woke up one Tuesday morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, although there was no sound of impact, and all I could feel was a tearing pain in my throat, a heaviness in my head that throbbed as if someone was slowly hammering inside, and a strange wadding in my limbs. It was as if the body refused to obey the simple commands of the mind, and even getting out of bed seemed like a feat. I swung my legs over the edge of the mattress with difficulty and staggered towards the bathroom, hoping that the cold water would give me back at least a grain of cheerfulness, but the reflection in the mirror showed only a pale face, dark circles under my eyes and disheveled hair that no longer yielded to a comb. Bernardo, as always, woke up before me, and wrapped in his favorite dinosaur blanket, he was sitting on the couch in the living room watching cartoons, holding a cup of cocoa, which he probably warmed up for himself, because I didn't remember getting up earlier. "Mommy, are you okay?" he asked, turning to me, and his big brown eyes, full of concern and sincere childish concern, made my heart ache. "You sound funny," he added, smiling slightly, trying to lighten the situation. I tried to respond with the same smile, light and carefree, but even that movement sent a painful response to my temples, and I had to lean against the door jamb before saying, "Just a little cold, buddy, nothing serious, nothing to worry about." After I gathered the last of my strength, called work and explained in a hoarse voice that I was ill and would not be able to leave in the next few days, it became clear that I needed to somehow resolve the issue with Bernardo, because leaving him with me, in my condition, meant putting him at risk, and I couldn't afford for him to get infected either. Grabbing a medical mask from the bathroom cabinet and pulling it over my face, I dialed my parents' number with trembling fingers and, when I heard my mother's voice, I barely whispered, "I feel bad. Could you look after Bernardo for a couple of days until I feel better?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause, as if I wasn't asking them for help, but for a favor that would require them to sacrifice. "Well, you know our rates, Rosaria," Mom finally said, and I heard her sigh listlessly, "and this time we want to pay in advance." Everything inside me tightened, anger, resentment, despair, and I wanted to scream, smash the phone against the wall, ask how a mother can demand an advance payment from her sick daughter when it comes to her own grandson, but I bit my tongue, as I have done more than once, and without saying a word, I opened the banking application and transferred the required amount to her. After I took Bernardo to them, wrapping him in a jacket, as if protecting him from my germs, and kissing the top of his head discreetly so as not to infect him, I returned home and literally crawled back into bed, praying that everything would work out in one day, that his body would cope on its own, that it was just a lingering cold. But every hour I got worse, and by evening it felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. Every breath turned into a struggle for air, while the walls of the room began to move, and even black dots floated in my closed eyes. When I realized that I couldn't get up anymore, when my hands were shaking so much that I could barely hold the phone to dial the emergency number, I felt a wave of panic sweep through my body, and everything that happened after that remained in blurred memories: sirens, stretchers, white corridors, hurried footsteps, and fragments of medical terms that rang out above my head as I tried to hold on, not to fall into the darkness. Finally, a doctor in a blue lab coat, with a gloomy expression on his face and a tired voice, stood by my bed, holding an X-ray in his hands, and said, "You have a severe form of pneumonia, Signora. You need to stay in the hospital for at least 2 weeks." These words sounded like a sentence, 2 weeks, and my heart began to beat faster, not from fear of illness, but from horror of what would happen to Bernardo, to work, to the routine that I had so diligently built from the wreckage of my old life. I managed to call my boss, and to my surprise, he was understanding, even offered to help, but when I dialed my parents' number, that's when everything finally fell apart. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," I whispered into the phone, trying to explain the situation despite my weakness. "The doctor said I need to stay at least 2 weeks. Could you please?" But before I could finish, her voice cut through my stream of words, piercingly cold, like a sharp knife. "We're going on a trip in 3 days, Rosaria. Your father, me, Sarah, and the kids. Everything has already been arranged. We're not going to cancel our plans just because you can't handle your responsibilities as a mother." The ward, already cold and uncomfortable, now seemed like a prison, the walls of which pressed down on me from all sides, and my mother's words echoed in my ears, over and over again, like nails in a lid that someone was trying to hammer into my self-esteem. "Mom, please." I begged, my voice trembling and breaking, and I could no longer hold back the tears. "I'll pay you twice as much as usual. I know it's inconvenient, but I really feel bad." The silence on the other end of the line dragged on for an excruciatingly long time, as if time had stopped, and I could almost imagine my mother sitting in her chair, frowning, twirling a strand of gray hair around her finger, weighing the benefits and disadvantages. Finally she said, "Your father and I paid $5,000 for this trip," and her voice took on that predatory, businesslike tone that always appeared when she felt she had the situation under control. "If you pay us $10,000 to cover our expenses and inconveniences, we will consider canceling," she said, and at that moment the oxygen monitor next to my bed beeped faster, signaling that my pulse had jumped sharply, although the doctor had not yet noticed anything. But panic began inside me, booming, sticky, as if I was running out of air, not because of pneumonia, but from the realization that my mother, the one who held my hand as a child, now speaks to me in the language of cold calculation, like a negotiator with a criminal who has a hostage. And that hostage, my own child, was Bernardo. "Mom, this is crazy," I breathed hoarsely. Every word was difficult, and even my breathing sounded like a groan. "You know I don't have that kind of money. I'm a single mother, I have a mortgage, bills." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, and the voice turned icy like the north wind. "Then I suggest you come up with something. Because if you don't pick Bernardo up in 3 days, I'll put him out on the street. I won't miss this trip, Rosaria. That's what you always do, you create drama, and then you expect everyone to give up everything for you." The connection was cut off, as if a thin thread had been cut with a knife, and I stared at my phone screen in mute amazement, not immediately realizing what had happened, and then, in disbelief, I tried to call back. Once, twice, 3 times. But no one answered the phone, and every time I tried to call, I was sent to voicemail until it finally became clear that my mother, my own mother, had blocked me while I lay exhausted and suffocating in a hospital bed. The reality of my situation hit me like a tidal wave, heavy, icy, sweeping away everything in its path. I was alone, truly alone in the city, and there was no one I could trust with Bernardo. No girlfriends, no relatives, because almost the whole family lived in other cities. Aunt Marta is in Naples, Uncle Jim is in Rome, and Cousin Ursula, the one I used to correspond with a lot, has moved to Florence for several years now. It's only been 6 months since I started a new life, and I haven't had time to make close friends, except for work colleagues, and even those were barely acquaintances, the kind you exchange polite smiles with at the coffee machine. But don't ask for help at times like this when it comes to a child and a 2-week absence. I lay on the pillow, my mask misting up with each of my heavy breaths, and I stared at the ceiling as if it could give me an answer, until despair squeezed my chest completely, and then, in complete impotence, I did what I had been avoiding for a long time, what I was ashamed of, what I was afraid of. I dialed Luke's number. My fingers were shaking, not only from the temperature, but also from emotion, and when he answered, his voice sounded almost surprised. "Rosaria? Is something wrong?" I had to swallow my pride, push the feeling of humiliation and betrayal deep somewhere, and, gasping for breath, explain that I was in the hospital, that I had severe pneumonia, that my parents refused to help, that Bernardo was left alone, and I did not know what to do. "I know it's a lot," I said, feeling my parched throat burn from the effort, "but could you take him in for a couple of weeks? Just for a while, until I get better." But he interrupted me. "I can't. Orsola is about to give birth. We're going to have a planned cesarean tomorrow. We have everything planned out." His voice was irritated, as if I'd interrupted him, as if I'd disrupted the order of his perfect new life. Orsola, his new wife, 25, the one with whom he cheated on me, the one for whom he left, now had to give birth to his child, and all this was happening while I, his ex-wife, lay alone in a sterile ward, fighting for every breath and for the only chance not to leave our son. Without a roof over your head. I hung up the phone, and my fingers slowly scrolled through the list of contacts, in which there was no one left who could help me, except for one name, which made my stomach clench just looking at it. Maria. My ex-mother-in-law. We hadn't spoken since the divorce, and even before that, our relationship was strained, brittle like glass that cracks with every wrong word. Maria always thought that I wasn't good enough for her precious Luke, and she made it clear almost from the first day. Her compliments always sounded ambiguous, as if criticism was hiding behind them, and sometimes it wasn't hiding at all. "Oh, you work in marketing? How interesting. I always thought that Luca would find someone in a more reputable profession," she said with a smile that sent a chill down her spine. After the divorce, of course, she stopped all contact with me, did not even send a short message, as if our long-term marriage was not worth a drop of her involvement, and therefore it was not surprising that she was probably delighted when Luca exchanged me for a younger and, in her eyes, appropriate model. But now she was my last hope. I looked at her name on the list, and I felt dizzy, from fever, fear, despair, and my hand with the phone trembled. The mask on my face was fogging up from the hot breath, but I knew that if I didn't try now, it might be too late. I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. 1 ring, 2, 3, and suddenly I heard a voice. "Rosaria?" Her voice was full of surprise, but there was something else in it, caution, maybe anxiety, and I, not knowing how to explain, not knowing where to start, just whispered, "It's not okay." Just hearing her voice, that familiar, correctly modulated tone, which used to so often contain subtle jabs at my parental inadequacy, my insufficiently serious career, my choice of partner, educational methods, everything that made up my life and in which, in Maria's opinion, I was invariably mistaken, and even in this unexpected tone of concern and determination, the ghosts of the previous assessment still slipped through, but it was this, her voice, that made my eyes instantly fill with tears, in such a strange way returning the feeling of something solid under my feet. "Maria." I gasped, and my voice began to falter, and incoherent words came out of my throat, as if illness, despair, and pain were trying to say through me what had been accumulating for so long, and between sobs, wheezes, and sobs, the whole story burst out of me: pneumonia, hospital, my parents' ultimatum, Luke's indifference, my helplessness, everything that weighed on my chest no less than pneumonia. By the end of the monologue, which became a confession, I could barely breathe, and the nurse came in to adjust the oxygen supply, anxiously looking at the monitor screen. There was a pause, so long that I was prepared to hear a polite refusal or, even more painfully, a snide comment, as if confirming everything that she always thought about me, that I was not coping, that I was not cut out for this, that I was weak, short-sighted and dramatic. But instead she said, "I'll be there tomorrow," and her voice was so steady, firm, determined, as if it was the only possible solution. "Write me the address of your apartment and the address of your parents. I'll take Bernardo and stay with you until you feel better." My hands were shaking as I typed the message, but for the first time since I was admitted to the hospital, I felt like I could breathe a little easier, and it wasn't because of the oxygen mask. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time it was my mother, and her voice, full of annoyance and fatigue, as if I were disturbing the peace for the 10th time, sounded on the speaker. "When are you coming to pick up your son?" she demanded, didn't ask, wasn't interested in my well-being, as if I'd left my dog with them instead of my grandson. Bernardo is unbearable, and we need to pack our things. I took a deep breath, gathering all my remaining strength, and replied quietly but firmly, "My ex-mother-in-law is coming to pick him up today." There was a moment of silence, and then a loud, indignant snorting sound came through the speaker, as if I had suggested leaving Bernardo to strangers. "Your ex-mother-in-law? Really, Rosaria? Couldn't you have found someone better than this woman?" Mom spat out with disdain, but before I could say anything, she had already disconnected the call. I leaned back against the pillows, my chest prickling not only from the inflammation, but from the realization. How did it happen that my cold, critical ex-mother-in-law turned out to be closer and warmer than my own mother? The first photo came just a few hours after Maria picked Bernardo up. He was sitting on a bench with an ice cream cone smeared on his cheeks and nose. His eyes were shining with happiness, and his smile was the same, real, carefree, which I had not seen for a long time. The photo was captioned, "Someone wanted Sunday afternoon." I couldn't help it. A smile touched my lips, despite the pain in my chest, despite the tears, and at that moment I felt gratitude, so sincere that it became warm in my chest. Throughout the day, new pictures came in, Bernardo doing his homework at the kitchen table, Bernardo helping to cook, focused, in an apron, with a spoon in his hand, Bernardo proudly showing off the pillow fortress erected right in the living room, where he apparently felt safe at last. Each frame was like a small window into a normal life, into a house that was coming back to me piece by piece through the screens of a sterile ward. And the video came in the evening. "Look what Grandma Maria gave me," he shouted excitedly, holding a colorful dinosaur puzzle in his hands, and the camera slowly turned and showed Maria sitting cross-legged on the floor of my living room with a puzzle box in front of her and scattered parts around. The days began to pass easier because I knew he was in safe hands, and now I could focus on my recovery, do breathing exercises, get out of bed, take the first steps down the hall, as if every walk towards the window brought me closer to home. Finally, after a week of treatment, the doctors allowed me to receive visitors, and on the day when the permission came into effect, I heard the sound of fast, hurried footsteps in the corridor, which echoed along the walls, and before I had time to think, the door opened, and Bernardo burst into the room. The sun was shining in his eyes, and there was that happy, painfully familiar smile on her lips. "Mommy," he exclaimed, and restraining himself, he ran cautiously to the bed, probably remembering about the pipes, as Maria had probably warned him in advance. "We brought you real food," she said, coming in after him, and there was no condemnation or irony in her voice, just concern, calmness, and firm practicality. She was holding a thermos bag, from which the warm aroma of soup could be heard, and began unpacking containers with homemade food, soup, fresh bread, and in one of the jars I recognized the very lemon squares that I once mentioned at a family dinner many years ago, and it seemed to me that no one was even listening then. While Bernardo, overwhelmed with emotions, shared stories about his week with me, gesturing, laughing and grabbing my hand, I watched Maria, and noticed that she had changed. There was softness in her movements, fatigue in her face, but some kind of light, and, most importantly, in her gaze was no longer the piercing criticism that once burned, but instead there was a warm, silent solidarity that I had missed so much all these months. She asked about my treatment, not just out of politeness, not because she felt obligated to make small talk, but because she really wanted to know how I was feeling, how my medications were going, whether my breathing was improving, whether the pain was going away, and surprisingly, she listened to my answers without interrupting, without shifting the topic to something more convenient for myself, and nodding, clarifying, showing such concern that I did not even get from my own mother, and every time she came, she brought something new. Fresh magazines that I used to love reading, books that I could reread just for fun, favorite dishes from my childhood, and she told me with a cheerful twinkle in her eyes about Bernardo's latest inventions and pranks at home, about how he was animatedly playing with toys that she found in her pantry, remembering that Luca used to play with them too. During one of the visits, while Bernardo was completely absorbed in a new coloring book with a dragon, diligently tracing the color within the contour, Maria suddenly fell silent, and I, sensing a change in her mood, looked up and noticed how her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling slightly, and in her face was a struggle with what that is, with a decision that is not easy for her. "I owe you an apology, Rosaria," she finally said, her voice low, a little hollow, and there was an unusual note of vulnerability in it, "for the way I've treated you all these years. I was wrong. I almost dropped the spoon I was about to use to eat some more soup, because in all the years I've known Maria, I've never heard her admit to a mistake even once, even when she was completely wrong about the obvious things." She continued, slightly averting her gaze. "Now I see who my son actually married. The woman he's with now, all she cares about is spending money. 3 different designer handbags in 1 week. And the way she talks to him." She shook her head, and disappointment, almost pain, was reflected on her face. "You were good for him, Rosaria. You loved him for who he was, not for what he could buy you. I was too blind to see it before." I watched her help Bernardo choose the right shade of blue for the sky in his drawing, and I realized that sometimes a family is not about blood, marriage certificates, or genetic affiliation, but about who stays close when everything falls apart, who puts their lives on pause. To take care of your child, who brings you the food you love, even if you only mentioned it once, who apologizes when you did something wrong, even if you didn't know how to do it before. That evening, when I was lying in bed and trying to sleep, my phone vibrated. It was a notification from social networks. My sister Sarah posted photos and noted our parents. They were at a beach resort, smiling at the camera, holding cocktails with umbrellas in their hands, and the children were building sand castles at the water's edge. The album's caption read, "The main thing is family." I actually laughed out loud, loudly and unexpectedly, and startled the nurse who was checking on my condition. The irony was almost too perfect, as if life itself was writing a satirical script. "The main thing is the family," wrote the very people who demanded 10,000 euros to look after their sick daughter's child, the very ones who, without batting an eye, promised to put their own grandson out on the street if their vacation turned out to be under threat. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, and I staggered out of the taxi in front of my house, Maria and Bernardo were waiting for me. The apartment was spotless. There was a full supply of food in the fridge, including pre-prepared meals, and even a banner with the inscription hung in the living room, "Welcome home, Mommy," made by Bernardo's hands, in neat letters cut out of colored paper. I couldn't hold back my tears, and hugging Maria tightly, as if I wanted to convey to her everything I couldn't say in words, I finally whispered, "Thank you, for everything." She looked at me with a slight smile and replied simply, "That's what a family is for." And at that moment I felt how these words, spoken by her, sounded completely different than when they were uttered by my own parents, in whose voice they sounded empty, like a slogan, not backed up by no action, no care, no warmth. Getting back to normal took time. I found a wonderful babysitter named Maria, a different young woman, whom Bernardo immediately trusted and even called the second Maria. She came when I had to go on business trips, and I never thought to call my parents again. Why ask for help from those who saw my son not as a joy, but as a burden, if there was a woman nearby who accepted him as one of her own, and never once made me feel safe? Debt? My parents tried to call me several times, and I saw their numbers on the screen, but I left calls on voicemail. What could I tell them? They have already said everything, and most importantly, they have shown me what place I occupy in their lives, somewhere below beach cocktails, bronze tan, and 10,000 conditions. Maria and I talked regularly, called each other via video. She sent Bernardo parcels with treats and books, and her questions were simple, kind, and human, like the mother I always wanted to have, but didn't get. And then, 5 months after the incident in the hospital, when it seemed that life had finally found stability, and a fragile sense of peace, like a plant taking root for the first time, began to slowly but surely sprout in everyday life, Maria called me with an unexpected proposal, and in her voice, which sounded on the phone with a characteristic Italian patter and soft in the intonation, I caught something almost childish. Excitement, joy, anticipation. "My brother Massimo is looking for someone with your exact qualifications for his company," she said, and there was pride in her words, as if she was talking about her own daughter. "I mentioned you, and he looked at your portfolio of works on the internet. He was very impressed, she continued, and when I heard this, I involuntarily straightened up, as if this gesture could convey my willingness to change, to a new opportunity. The salary is twice what you're getting now, she added, as if anticipating my silent doubt, and without giving me time for internal struggle, she added, and before you ask about Bernardo, I'd love to keep an eye on him while you're at work. I'm retired now, and it would be perfect to have his grandmother around every day. Thoughts swirled in my head: double my current salary, start all over again in another state, the opportunity to leave behind memories of pain and betrayal, and most importantly, to give Bernardo not just a home, but a place where he is truly welcome, where he will feel loved, important, and desired. 2 weeks later, Bernardo and I packed up and were ready to leave. I didn't tell my parents or Sarah that we were moving. After all, they would figure it out on their own, and by then we would be far away, starting a new life with a family that chose us, and not just accepted us by biological obligation. 2 years can change everything, and they really have. Bernardo excelled at his new school, found friends easily, brought home excellent grades, and every evening proudly shared stories about his achievements, which he himself assessed with an unusual seriousness for his age. I rose to the position of Senior Director of Marketing at Massimo's company, and my salary continued to grow, opening up opportunities that I could not even dream of before. Maria became a real grandmother for Bernardo, not by blood, but by choice, by daily care, by love, in which there was not an ounce of ostentation, only sincere, deeply human warmth. She didn't miss his football matches, helped with school projects, arranged movie nights with popcorn for him, baked his favorite cheese buns, and every time I looked at it, my heart sank, not from pain, but from gratitude, from the feeling that finally someone loved me. My son the way I've always dreamed of being loved. We started looking for a house, a real one, ours, with a garden where Bernardo could kick a ball after school, with a kitchen where we could cook together, with a room that he could decorate however he wanted. Just this morning, I was considering mortgage options, calculating contributions, toying with the idea of building a treehouse in my backyard, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to dream without looking back. And then the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code was intimidatingly familiar. "Hello?" I replied cautiously. "Rosaria. It's Mom." I almost dropped my coffee mug. Her voice, strange, strained, with some kind of almost physical pain, cut through me like an unexpectedly cool wind on a hot day. 2 years of silence, and this. "What do you want?" I tried to keep my tone neutral, but inside, everything was shrinking from the words that hadn't been spoken in all this time. "We need your help," she said, not even bothering to ask how I was, and at that moment I wanted to laugh. It was so recognizable, so typical. "Mom, is it because of Sarah?" I asked, and I didn't even expect an answer. "Of course, it's because of Sarah. It was always because of Sarah. She's gone." Her voice faltered, and I suddenly felt like there was a whole tragedy hiding behind those 2 words. She ran off with some man she met on the internet, just packed up and left. She didn't even say goodbye to the children. She left a note: "I need to find myself." I slumped into my office chair in disbelief. She abandoned her children. The mother continued, "They have been with us for 3 weeks now. Your father and I, we're not as young as we used to be. Kids, they're expensive. Food, clothes, school supplies," and I realized what this was leading to. "What exactly do you want from me, Mom?" Her voice took on that familiar tone again, a mask of guilt that hid manipulation, and I immediately recognized that intonation. "You're their aunt. We thought you could send us some money every month to help with the expenses. It's the least you could do, for the family." I couldn't help but laugh. Not maliciously, not maliciously. It was a real, sincere laugh that burst out from somewhere deep inside me, as a reaction to the absurd, to a memory, to a past that no longer causes pain, but only amazement. "The least I could do for the family," I repeated, still laughing, Like when you demanded 10,000 euros to look after your grandson while I was in the hospital with pneumonia? Or when you threatened to put a 6-year-old child out on the street? Is this, in your opinion, a family commitment? There was a muffled voice on the other end. We had plans. No, Mom, you had a choice, and you chose a beach vacation instead of your sick daughter, who was suffocating in a hospital room, and instead of your grandson, who was only 6 years old at the time and didn't understand why he was being passed from hand to hand like a suitcase again. You chose every time. Sarah's drama, her impulsive actions, her senseless romantic adventures instead of my stability, instead of my quiet efforts to be a good mother and just a normal person. And now, after 2 years of silence, you're calling me asking me to send money. And not just money, but a little every month, as if it were friendly help, and not an irresponsible abandonment of their own grandchildren. We're talking about innocent children, Rosaria, you said, and it sounded like you wanted to put pressure on my conscience, to play the guilt card that you've always played so skillfully. Yes, Mom, we're just talking about an innocent child. About my son. Your grandson. 2 years ago. When you left him. I heard you sob, your voice tremble. I'm sorry that Sarah abandoned her children, I really apologize, but, and then I interrupted, but you raised her the way she is. You taught her that you can do anything, and you'll still be on her side. And now you have to deal with the consequences. Well, if you don't help voluntarily, your mother's voice became sharp, prickly as a blade, we'll just bring the children to your apartment and leave them there. Then you'll have no choice but to take responsibility. I couldn't help but smile at this empty threat. Go on, Mom. But good luck finding me. I moved to another state 2 years ago. What are you doing? She muttered, now confused, knocked out of her usual rhythm. Where are you? It's not your concern, I replied calmly. Do you know what they say about karma, Mom? She always comes back. You and Dad raised Sarah to believe that she can do anything without consequences. You let her do whatever she wanted, while I was criticized for every step. Now you are reaping what you have sown. There was silence on the other end of the line, but it was no longer threatening, but strangled. Please, Rosaria, the voice became different, finally falling from the pedestal of imaginary superiority, becoming almost human, vulnerable. We are your parents. We need your help. I laughed, not maliciously, not theatrically, but really, with all the fullness of those emotions that had been accumulating in me all these years. Funny. I was your daughter when I needed your help. And then it didn't matter at all. Goodbye, Mom. I dropped the call, and without hesitation, blocked the number. And at the same moment, I felt the weight that I had been carrying since childhood, resentment, guilt, disappointment lifted from my shoulders. Later that evening, as I sat in the kitchen and watched Bernardo gravely gluing a mock up of a volcano for his science project, and Maria carefully helping him select paints for the lava, I knew I had made the right decision, not the moment I hung up the phone, but much earlier, when I chose to build my life is based on love and respect, not on a sense of duty to those who have never tried to earn this duty. Months passed, and life went on. The grapevine, as I jokingly called family gossip, came mainly from Aunt Marta, who still loved long monthly phone calls and knew the news better than any local radio station. It was from her that I learned that my parents hired an expensive nanny because they couldn't handle the children themselves, that they had already started spending their retirement savings, and, of course, that they told everyone who was willing to listen about their ungrateful younger daughter, who refused to help in a difficult moment. But do you know what the most amazing thing is? Said Aunt Martha in our last conversation. They never said a single bad word about Sarah. Can you believe it? She abandoned her children without warning, ran off with some man from the internet, and still, they find excuses for her. I wasn't surprised. Some things, no matter how much you want to believe otherwise, just never change. Last week, I closed the deal for our new house, a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a spacious kitchen and a large, green backyard, perfect for a future Bernardo's 10th anniversary party. Maria had already chosen one of the available rooms, Grandma's, as Bernardo called it, and came to visit us almost every week. My son is doing well in school, plays football, and has recently been named to the honorary team. I've been promoted to executive director of marketing, and Massimo is increasingly hinting that the next step is to partner with the company. Our life is full of real happiness, quiet, strong, reliable, and devoid of the dramas that I once lived with for years, thinking that this was the norm. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in the backyard with a cup of tea, and Bernardo and Maria are tinkering in their little garden, tending the strawberries and basil they planted together in the spring, I think about how strange life can be. How those from whom you expect support can turn away without hesitation, and help will come from where you did not expect. How losing what you thought was the foundation can open the way to what truly matters. And as the opinion of those who didn't appreciate you eventually ceases to mean anything. We have built a life for ourselves in which there is love, respect, and a family, one that appears when it is really needed, not for the sake of profit, not for a fee, but simply because it is a real family. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.